All right, I am going to walk through the homework for the two-step equations handout that we got on Friday. For most of you, I got it on Friday. And to help you over the weekend, I'm going to go ahead and complete some of these together. We're going to walk through them. I need you to show your work, okay? Don't just write the answer. I want you to show the work. So I'm going to show you how to do this, where we're going to isolate. I'm going to zoom in a little. We're going to isolate the variable. So that's this guy here. We're going to isolate the variable. Actually, it's just this guy right here. And we need to do two steps to make that happen. All right, so when we talked, I talked about a constant, which is right here. And actually, I'm just going to highlight the constant in green. Okay, constant is in green. The variable I will highlight in yellow. And the coefficient I'm highlighting in blue. All right, so I have this first one here that's negative 5n plus 8 equals negative 7. So what I'm going to do is I want to isolate, in this case, I want to isolate the negative 5n. So the coefficient is attached to the variable, so I can't get rid of that yet. But I do have this constant out here on the side that I can get rid of. And the way I get rid of it is I do the inverse operation. You'll hear me say that a lot. So the inverse operation of plus 8 is minus, and I use the inverse, additive inverse, so minus 8. If I subtract 8, I'm left with 0, right? But we need to stay in balance, because equation actually is talking about equal. So we have to do it equally. So what I do on one side, I have to do on the other. So I'm going to subtract 8 over here as well. And I'm going to zoom in even a little bit more if I can. There we go. That'll be easier. So negative 7 minus 8. Well, if I start at negative 7, I'm going to go 8 more in the negative direction. Okay? Or, if you remember, same signs add, different signs subtract. And if it's the same sign, you keep the sign. So it's going to end up with a negative 15. Okay? So I end up, this is a 0, right? I was able to cancel that out. So I end up with actually a negative 5n equals negative 15. And negative 5n is the same as saying negative 5 times n. So if I'm doing that, then I can actually do the inverse of multiplication, which is division. And when I do the inverse, I'm going to choose the coefficient here to divide. All right? So if it's a division problem, I'll choose the number that is dividing the variable. Okay? And when it's multiplication, I'm going to use the number that is multiplying the variable. So if I divide these two, I basically am canceling this out, right? Because negative 5 divided by negative 5 equals 1. So I end up with 1 times n. Well, what I do to one side to stay in balance, I have to do to the other side. So negative 15 divided by negative 5. Well, two negatives divided together make a positive. So negative 15, so basically it's 15 divided by 5, which is 3. And I don't need the 1 in front of n, so my eventual completed answer is n equals 3. Well, I can check this. Does that work? I can put it back into the equation. So let's see. Negative 5 times 3 plus 8 equals negative 7. Let's see if that works. I should do it over here. Is this true? Well, negative 5, I'm going to start with multiplication. Negative 5 times 3 is negative 15 plus 8. Okay, well, negative 15 plus 8, I'm at negative 15. I'm going to go 8 in the positive direction. That puts me at negative 7. So does negative 7, is that equal to negative 7? Yes. So there's the first question. All right, I'll go a little quicker as we move through. All right, so now I've got 28 equals negative 2 minus 5x. So what I want to do is I'm going to quickly identify. Okay, oops. Quickly identify that this is the constant, right? There's the variable, and here's the coefficient. Okay, and I'm highlighting the negative or the minus sign as well, because when we're working with this, we have to make sure that we keep the signs. So minus 5 is the same as plus negative 5x. Right? It's the same idea. So I'm circling the whole thing just so that I don't get mixed up. So if I've got a negative 2, what could I add to negative 2 to get 0? Okay, this is where I'm starting. I'm starting with the constant in this case. Okay, I'm starting with the constant because I want to get these by themselves so that I can later divide. So if I've got my constant, I'm going to add 2 in order to get 0. But what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I get 30. 30 equals 0 plus negative 5x. Well, what can I do to negative 5x to get the x by itself? Well, I'm going to use the inverse operation. So if I'm multiplying, which I am, negative 5 times x, I can divide. And what am I dividing? I'm dividing the coefficient. That's in blue. So the negative 5. So if I divide by negative 5, what happens? These cancel each other out. They just become 1. So I'm just left with x. That's why I'm doing that. Right? The whole point is just to get x by itself. But what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So 30 divided by negative 5. Well, I know 5 goes into 36 times. And that when I'm dividing a positive and a negative, I get a negative. So I end up with negative, sorry, did I say 5 times? 6 times. I don't know what I said. So negative 6 equals x. Or if you prefer, x equals negative 6. Okay, let's plug it back in. Let's see if it works. 28, equals negative 2 minus 5 times negative 6. Or plus negative 5 times negative 6. All right, let's see. Well, let's start with using PEMDAS. We're going to start with multiplication. So negative 5 times negative 6 is positive 30. All right, so now I've got negative 2 plus 30 equals 28. Well, 30, when I add negative 2 to 30, it's going to go 2 in the negative direction. So I end up with 28. And 28 is equal to 28, so I know it's correct. Okay, so this is how you can check your work. You're going to plug it back in. All right, here's a tricky one. I've got a b being divided by 4. So if I look at it, I'm just going to quickly identify my various elements. All right, so 7's my constant. All right, and then I'm adding to 7 a b divided by 4. So I kind of have to reverse the order of operations a little bit. It's not always the case, but in this case it is. So how can I get 7 by itself? Well, I need to, 7 minus 7 gets 0, right? So I would subtract 7, and that gives me 0. And then over on this side, when I subtract 7, I get 2 minus 7. Well, I go 2, and I go 7 in the negative direction, right? Same signs add, different signs subtract. So, and you keep the larger absolute value sign. So 7 minus 2 is 5, and I keep the negative. So I end up with negative 5 equals 0 plus b divided by 4. Okay, well now what can I do? Well, we've been doing this idea of what if I were to, I'm going to rewrite it so that I can see it clearer. I'm going to do something with 4, okay? So I'm going to add, subtract, multiply, divide, something. Well, what am I doing with 4? Because this is the coefficient, okay? I'm going to do the inverse of division, because we're dividing here. And the inverse of division is multiplication. Inverse means opposite, right? So inverse is multiplication. Well, I'm multiplying by 4. So I'm going to write it this way. B over 4 times 4, which if we did it as an improper fraction would look like this. And then over here, I'm going to do the same thing. 4 times negative 5. Okay, because whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. And this shows you why this works. B, here, I'm going to go this way with it. I'm going to show you. B times 4 is 4b over 4 times 1, because I just multiply straight across. 4 times 1 is 4. Well, I end up with 4 over 4, which is 1. So it just cancels it out. That's why I'm doing this inverse. It's just the whole reason is to get B all alone. Well, what's 4 times negative 5? Well, a positive and a negative make a negative, and 4 times 5 is 20, so it's negative 20. Or if you want to redo it, B equals negative 20. If you plug that back in, okay, you're going to find 20 over 4, which is, if I reduce, 20 divided by 4 is 5. Where am I at? There we go, negative 20. That's what I meant. All right, so it's, let me erase. So negative 20, I missed that. I almost put 20 in, but I have a negative 20. All right, that's why I'm all mixed up. So negative 20 divided by 4 is going to be negative 5. So I've got 7 plus negative 5 equals 2. Well, 7 plus negative 5 is 2. So 2 equals 2. So it does work. All right. I'm going to stop double checking. I'm just going to move through these a little quicker now. We're going to keep getting faster and faster. So negative 10a minus 5 equals 135, starting with the constant here. So I have a minus 5 or a plus negative 5. So I'm looking for that inverse. I'm going to inverse operation this guy. And if I add 5 here, what do I get? Well, negative 5 plus 5 is 0. So what I do to one side, I do to the other. 140. I get negative 10a plus 0 equals 140. Negative 10a equals 140. I'm multiplying, right? So 10 times a. So I'm going to do the inverse, which is divide. And I want to get rid of this full negative 10. I want a by itself and not as a negative. So if I divide negative 10 by negative 10, I get positive 1, right? Which leaves me with a, or 1a, if we're going to do it this way. But over here, I got to do the same thing. So 140 divided by 10, or negative 10, I should say, is 14 over negative 1, which is basically just negative 14. And I don't need the 1 in front of the a, so the answer is a equals negative 14. 5. 13 equals x over 3 plus 8. Okay, so I want to start with the constant here, right? The plus 8. Because this, I don't want to mess with this yet. I want to just get x divided by 3 all of on its own. So how can I get x divided by 3 all by itself, or x over 3? Well, if I've got a positive 8 here, the inverse would be minus 8. If I subtracted 8 from 8, I get 0. So what I do to one side, I do to the other. So 13 minus 8 is 5. So I have 5 equals x over 3 plus 0, okay, which is just x over 3. So I'm going to rewrite it here. That was an ugly 5. X over 3. Now I'm doing x divided by 3 is what I'm looking at. So what could I do to get x on its own? I would do the inverse operation of division, which is multiplication, and I'm going to use the number. Okay, I'm not going to multiply by x. I'm going to use the number here, the coefficient. All right, so if I do that, I multiply by 3. Well, that's 3 over 3. I'm just going to kind of show you that way, which crosses each other out. That's why we're doing it. And I'm going to multiply by 3. So I get 3 times 5 is 15. And I now have x by itself. So 15 equals x, or x equals 15, however you want to, if you want to show it that way. Number 6. K divided by 3 plus 9 equals 2. Hopefully you're getting a sense of what we're doing. I'm going to start with the constant, this guy here. Then I'm moving on to the, coefficient, and then I should have k by itself. Remember, I'm trying to get k all on its own, so that I get a k equals something. So what do I do to make this 9 become a 0? I do the inverse operation. So if we're adding 9, we'll be subtracting 9. That looks a little bit ugly. All right, and what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I now have k divided by 3 plus 0 equals 2 minus 9. So I'm at 2 and I go 9 in the negative direction. I end up in the negative, and a negative 7. All right, so k over 3 equals negative 7. I'm dividing k by 3, so instead of in order to get k on its own, I'm going to do the inverse operation. And I'm multiplying by 3. When I multiply by 3, it cancels out that denominator, because 3 over 3 is 1, right? 3 divided by 3 is 1, so I left with k. But what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I end up with k equals negative 7 times 3, which is negative 21. Let's just double check that one while we're here. So if I go negative 21 divided by 3 plus 9 equals 2. Well, negative 21 divided by 3 is where I start, order of operations. I end up with negative 7. So now I have negative 7 plus 9 equals 2. Well, negative 7, I'm going to go 9 in the positive direction, right? That actually takes me up to 2. So 2 equals 2. All right, let's flip the page over and let's do the second half, which is 7 through 14. So we have similar things. I'm just going to show you with the highlighter the constant, minus 12. Let's look at the coefficient. It's going to be a 10, right? Because the variable is divided by 10. So we're going to start with the constant, right? We want to get v over 10 by itself. Well, what can I do to minus 12 to get positive 12? Well, I can do not positive 12, but 0. That's what I'm looking for. Well, negative 12 plus 12 is 0. So I'm adding 12 to both sides in order to keep the equation in balance. So negative 13 plus 12, that goes 12 in the positive direction, which leaves us with a 1. So we have 1 equals v over 10 plus 0. Let me rewrite it this way. 1 equals v over 10. I'm going to, since v is being divided by 10, I'm going to multiply. And I'm going to multiply by what? By 10. And what I do to one side, I do to the other side. So 10 times 1 is 10. And since 10 over 10 is just 1, so it leaves me with v. So 10 equals v, or v equals 10. Okay. 8. Negative 5 plus x divided by 3, or x over 3, equals negative 11. Okay, well, I want to get x over 3 by itself. So I need to do something to the negative 5 over here. What am I going to do? Inverse operation. And I'm going to choose that constant. Okay, so I'm adding 5 so that I get 0. Negative 5 plus 5 is 0. What I do to one side, I do to the other. If I'm sounding like a broken record, I'm sorry, but trying to get this solidified in how this works. So negative 11 plus 5. Well, I'm at a negative 11. I go 5 in the positive direction. I end up at negative 6. So I bring down my x over 3. So I end up with 0 plus x over 3 equals negative 6. Well, now what do I need to do? I'm looking at the coefficient, and I'm going to do an inverse operation. So if x is divided by 3, I'm going to multiply by 3. And what I do to one side, I do to the other. Well, 3 over 3 cancels itself out, so I'm left with x. That's why I keep doing this, because I want to get x by itself. So negative 6 times 3, positive and negative make a negative, right? And 3 times 6 is 18. So x equals 18. Let's do 9. 252 equals negative 11n plus 10. All right. Well, I want to get the coefficient and variable by themselves so that I can do the final operation. So I need to take care of this plus 10 first, right? That's the constant. And if I'm adding 10, I could do the opposite, right? Instead of addition, I'm doing the inverse operation of subtraction. 10 minus 10 is 0. 252 minus 10 is 242. So 242 equals negative 11n plus 0. All right, well, I don't need the plus 0. I'm going to do something with the coefficient here. And we're going to do it's 11, negative 11 times n, right? Because the negative 11n just means time. So I'm going to divide. And what happens when I divide? I divide negative 11. I end up getting a 1, right? These cancel each other out. And I'm left with 1. And then if I divide one side, I got to divide the other. So now I'm dividing 242 by 11. All right, and this one's going to take me a second to do. Maybe we should just do it over here. And remember, we're dividing by negative 11, so let's not forget that. So 11 goes into 24 2 times. I'm left with that. All right, well, 11 we already established goes into 22 2 times. So I've got 22. So I'm left with 22. Negative 22, because we don't want to forget that, equals n, or n equals negative 22. All right, let's go to 10. 189 equals negative 1 plus 10m. Again, I'm going to start with the constant to make sure I can get the coefficient and variable by themselves. So 10m I want to get by itself. So I'm going to do the inverse of negative 1, which is to add 1. If I add 1 to negative 1, I end up with 0. I end up with 0 plus 10m. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. I end up with 190. 190, I'm going to rewrite it so it's a little cleaner, equals 10m. Well, 10 times n, I'm doing multiplication, so I'm going to do the inverse, which is division. And if I divide by 10, this cancels it out. I'm left with m. But what I do to one side, I do to the other. This one's pretty easy because I end up with 190 divided by 10. I just cross out those zeros and I get 19 over 1, which is 19. Equals m, or m equals 19. Okay, let's go 11. Negative 6 equals negative 8 plus p over 11. Again, I want to get, let's see, I want to get this by itself, okay? So what do I need to do first? I need to take care of that constant, and that's -8. So -8, what would I do to -8 to get it to be equal 0? I do the inverse. The inverse of -8 is +8 or +8. So -8 plus 8 equals 0. I'm going to do the same over here. -6 plus 8. I'm at -6. I go 8 in the positive direction, so I go 6 to get to 0, and I go 2 more, which gets me to 2. 2 equals 0 plus p over 11. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Now, p is being divided by 11, so I'm doing the inverse, right? And I'm going to use this 11 multiplied by 11 so they cancel each other out, and I'm left with p. But what I do to one side, I do to the other. So 11 times 2 is 22, and I end up with p equals 22. Once they're equal, it's pretty easy. You can flip it. You can flip it at any time that you want to. But, all right. 12. R divided by 16 plus 6 equals 7. Again, just so we know what we're doing, we want to get the variable and coefficient by themselves. So first step is to take care of that constant, which is 6. So plus 6, I can do the inverse operation of -6. 6 minus 6 is 0. 7 minus 6 equals 1. And I'm left with r divided by 16 plus 0 equals 1. All right, I'm just going to rewrite this so it's a little bit cleaner. R divided by 16 equals 1, or r over 16 equals 1. Well, if I'm dividing by 16, I would do the inverse operation, which is to multiply by 16, which cancels that out, leaves me with r. But what I do to one side, I do to the other. 1 times 16 is 16. And I've got r equals 16. Let's just plug that in really quick, see if that works. I'm saying 16 divided by 16 plus 6 equals 7. And we do order of operations, which is division first. So 16 over 16 is just 1. So now I have 1 plus 6 equals 7. Well, 1 plus 6 is 7. So 7 equals 7. 13. Last two. Here we go. 0 equals n divided by 2 minus 4. All right, well, we want to get n over 2 by itself, right? I want to get the coefficient and variable by themselves. So I'm going to work with the constant. What would be the inverse operation of -4? I would add 4, right? If I add 4 to -4, I get 0. Well, if I do one thing to one side, I got to do it to the other. So 0 plus 4 is 4. So 4 equals n divided by 2 plus 0. Or 4 equals n divided by 2. Again, I'm dividing the variable by 2. So instead of to get this n by itself, I'm going to do the inverse operation, which is to multiply by 2. Cancels that out. Okay, but what I do to one side, I do to the other. So 2 times 4 is 8. And then I can rewrite that as n equals 8. And last question. And we'll go ahead and double check this when we're done. So -3 plus 9b equals 96. What do I want to get by myself? All by itself? I want to get the coefficient and the variable all by itself. Okay? So I'm going to work with the constant first. So the -3. So -3, what's the opposite of -3, or what's the inverse operation I would use? Oh, I would add 3 to -3 to get 0. And I end up with 0 plus 9b. But what I do to one side, I do to the other. Let's not forget that. 96 plus 3 is 99. So I've got 9b, right? Because 0 plus I don't need. 9b plus equals 99. Well, 9, I'm saying 9 times b equals 99. So I'm going to do the inverse operation. And I'm going to use that coefficient. I'm going to divide 9b by 9, which cancels out the 9s, and I'm left with b. But what I do to one side, I do to the other. And so 99 divided by 9 is 11. So I end up with b equals 11. And we'll go ahead and plug that back in just to check. So I have negative 3 plus 9 times 11 equals 96. Well, we start with multiplication. 9 times 11 is 99. All right, now I have negative 3 plus 99 equals 96. Well, negative 3 plus 99, I'm going to take 99 and go 3 in the negative direction, so that's 3 less. And I end up with 96 equals 96. And there you go. There it all is. And here's the final look at the back page. All right. I want all of that down. You can rewind it, skip ahead, do whatever you need to get all the steps. All right. Best of luck to you. Thanks.